Hello and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Annie and Kate. Hello, Annie. And welcome Isabelle Kingsley, our guest this time. So Isabelle is a colleague at the University of New South Wales. She's a researcher, educator and science communicator, and she works as a research associate at the uni, and she focuses on STEM study and work, from workplace gender equity and program evaluation to science communication and public outreach. But she actually started out as a school teacher, and she's also done amazing things like directing the Sydney Science Festival. So welcome, Isabelle.
Thanks. Hi.
And we're going to, I've got different gin this time, Annie. So we're going to talk about what we're drinking. I am talking about what I'm drinking, which is this French gin.
Ooh, very posh. What's it called?
Very nice. It's called Gin Imri. It's a craft gin that is vegan.
I didn't know gins weren't vegan.
I know, but they've clearly understood the marketing thing.
Oh, I love it.
I'm glad I'm not the only one on the hard liquor, because I'm drinking whiskey and I thought I'm going to be a really bad guest for the hard liquor.
You're a totally fine guest for us.
You're very much welcome with the beverage of choice. What sort of whiskey are you on, Isabelle?
It's a delicious Japanese whiskey that I found here in Sydney, and it was a special treat for me for my recent birthday. So
excellent.
Good work. Well, it's 7 o'clock in the morning for me, and much as I'm very easy to convince to have a gin and tonic at most times of the day, I am on my first cup of tea of the morning. I believe it's PG Tips, not my favourite of Yorkshire tea, but I'll allow it.
I'm very sorry because I failed to take into account the time change. So next time I'll schedule it at a more civilised hour for you, Annie.
It's all right. I'm always up early, you know that.
Anyway, so Annie, do you want to kick off with your question?
Yes, so we have a few questions that we kind of have on a rolling kind of repeat system, and the point here as well is to ask questions that our guests probably don't always get asked. So we didn't want to be, sort of repeating stuff that you can find on other pods or other interviews. So I'm going to kick off with what's something that if you could go back and tell your younger self that you wish you could have known back then. You can jump in a time machine and go back and speak to you as a youngster. What would you tell yourself? What piece of advice?
Actually, recently I was at a Women in STEM event, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So I was at a Women in STEM event in March, just before COVID craziness started. And they asked us exactly that question. And what I would tell my younger self is, you're good enough. And that just stems from a lot of conversations and a lot of feelings that I've had over the past year of imposter syndrome.
Oh, right. Yeah.
The whole even today, I was looking at some of the people that you've had on the show, and I was like, oh my gosh, really? Like, you want to talk to me now? So this whole idea of imposter syndrome and never thinking that you're quite good enough or you quite fit in because, you're not there yet, or you're not at that level, you don't have the expertise. And I find, especially in academia and in my role right now at UNSW, I've been feeling that a lot, and I'm trying to understand it and move away from it and find ways of not feeling it. But it's still there. And I think a lot of people experience that, actually. So I would tell my younger self, you're good enough. And I keep telling myself that now.
Well, it's fascinating when you have when you mostly work with men and they put their hand up for things they're totally unqualified for. And you're like, where do you get that confidence?
Yeah.
You're an idiot.
Yeah, it's confidence, but it's also, I feel sometimes it's the scope. I mean, I work for the Office of the Women in STEM Ambassador, so Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith, and last year she gave the press club, the National Press Club address in around this time in November, and I had just started working for her. And she was talking about all these big projects that her office was doing, a lot of which were things that I feel responsible for. And I heard her talk about them, and I heard the scope of the, the importance and the impact that these projects can have. And I just remember sitting there in my chair, like my stomach knotted, thinking, wow, this is really big. Why am I doing this? Like, why me? So sometimes, I don't know if it's a lack of confidence, because I know I can do it, but it just feels like too big or too important. It's very weird, this imposter syndrome.
The thing is that's interesting for me on the imposter syndrome part is we all have it. And I think if we're going to compare ourselves on achievement and on, ability for impact, or just, whether somebody's profile is just something that's overwhelming, then we should also compare ourselves on the weaknesses as well. And, we don't do that. We don't look for somebody's weakness in others when we're comparing ourselves against each other. We're like, well, I'm deficient in some way. I'm not as good because, and then you start listing it out. But the interesting thing is we all have the imposter syndrome. So even folks like Mike Cannon-Brookes from Atlassian, he stood on stage at TEDx Sydney about 2 or 3 years ago now and spoke about his imposter syndrome as a founder. And you're like, dude, you've built $1 billion company that's listed on the stock market in the US, and you're enormously successful in lots and lots of different ways. If he's still got the imposter syndrome, then maybe it's okay that I have it too. And you know what? I think if we just recognize that we all have it, we can maybe start to push the imposter syndrome to the side and go, you know what? I don't really need to spend that much time on it. I don't need to spend time quantifying it. How big is mine versus somebody else's? Just recognize we all have it and move on.
Yeah. There's comfort in knowing that everyone also experiences it.
Exactly.
The other thing that I think is fascinating is if you look at like the Dunning-Kruger Complex, if you just look at that, only stupid people don't know their limitations. So anyone who's doing anything big is completely rational and sane to be going, oh my God, I'm doing this big thing. Will I be able to do it? It means you're intelligent.
Oh, well, I'll take that.
That's a good way of putting it.
I know, that's how I explain it to people all the time. That if you've got imposter syndrome, it means you're not dumb, because you've got ability to work out the scale of the kind of thing that you're trying to do. And it means you're probably trying to do bigger things. If you're doing safe, boring things, then you're not going to be suffering from imposter syndrome. You're going to be sitting happily there in the back office doing boring stuff. So I mean, try to do new things.
It's a very good way of seeing it. Very good way of seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just my crazy way.
Positive spin on it.
I'm going to ask you about your approach to self-care. Do you do anything to self-care? Because you've had a full agenda. You've been doing your PhD. You've been working for Professor Harvey Smith. You've been doing all sorts of amazing stuff. You've got a pretty full dance card. How do you approach that, or don't you?
Look, like everyone, I think that it's hard sometimes, but I do try really, really hard. And I guess mornings are mine. So I get up at 6:30, but you can't get me before 9. And that's because I am having my coffee, slowly waking up. Then I do a little workout either at home or, in the park or something, do a little something for me that's physically active, and just kind of slowly get into the day. So those 2.5 hours in the morning, they're completely mine, and I take them every day, or pretty much every day. So I think it just sets me up for the day. It gets me kind of in the right mindset, and it also makes sure that I stay physically active, because for me that's really, really important.
especially now we're all sitting down talking on Zoom and Teams all day.
Exactly. Yes, it's incredible the difference it makes. I really noticed that just that incidental walking, like from home to the bus stop or around campus to meetings or just to have lunch with someone, that really it adds up at the end of the day. And not having that at all, my body could feel it. I could definitely feel that difference. So especially now, it's really important. So mornings are mine.
Well, that's a really good approach, and carving it out and owning that as yours is a really nice idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy for me. I can do that because, I don't have kids or anything like that. So if I had kids, I'm sure it would be quite different. But it's kind of easy for me to be able to kind of carve that out and keep it as my own. So I take advantage of it.
So I'm going to kick off with some of the broader questions, if that's okay, Isabelle. I'm in your bio when Kate introduced you. I just found it super interesting. You started out as a school teacher and then transitioned into academia. So tell us about how you got into teaching in the first place and then what led you to make that shift.
Well, look, I was a teacher since I was 6 or 7. I have this photo that I love of my brother sitting on my lap. I'm reading a book to him. I used to teach him. I used to play teacher. I'd sit him on the little wooden desks and make him do maths problems or coloring in, and then I'd mark his assignments. And
so it was real work then. It wasn't just sort of make believe. You actually gave him proper full-on lessons and marked his work.
I love it.
I love that.
Yep. I made assignments. He had to do them. Then I marked them. And so it was obvious, and then in high school, I was teaching swimming lessons and I was just always teaching people. I loved that. So it was obvious to me what I was going to do after uni. And so I started teaching, and I was a science and French teacher and physical education in Canada. And so I was so excited to teach, and I had all this enthusiasm and this passion to change all these young people's minds and hearts, and feeling everything that a young new teacher would be feeling. And then the classroom was a completely different reality, and I did not like it at all. And it wasn't necessarily the teaching that I didn't like, and it definitely wasn't the students. It was the system, and it did not mesh with my values. And 4 years in, I thought, I can't do this, and so I left. I thought,
what was the mismatch in values?
Yeah, it was basically the whole idea of standardization. Pushing for the kinds of assessment that encourage rote learning. Also, the situation that put me over the edge was that one of the students didn't come to my class all year. She came the first day and then didn't come, so I thought she had dropped my course. This was a French course, and which in Canada is compulsory. In year 9. And so at the end of the year, the principal came and asked me if I could write a modified exam for her to just get her passed. And I said, well, I've never seen this person before. And, kind of saying, well, no, I can't do that because everyone else who showed up all year, showed up and put the effort in. I can't just let this person slide. This is not the kind of thing we want to be teaching young people, to not show up, not put in effort and be able to get through in life. But I had to do it in the end, and that didn't sit well with me. And they basically said, well, it's about student success and every student should succeed. And to me, that was not success. And that was not my definition of equipping young people for the future. And so I thought, I can't do this. So I left, and I found a really awesome job in a museum, doing science education in a museum. And that was the best, because it was a little bit like teaching, but in a much more open, free, and creative environment. And I just absolutely loved it. So it was a good decision.
But it's a really good early lesson about aligning your values with your job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people are driven by money or by titles, job titles and things like that. I actually took a pay cut to leave teaching and go into museum education at the time. But for me, it wasn't about like how much money I was making. It was about being happy and comfortable and feeling like I was doing something meaningful with my work. So yeah, I was, and it worked. I was so much happier working at the museum than I ever was at the school.
Looks like we've lost Annie. She'll appear again. Don't worry, we'll just keep chatting.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm really fascinated. How did you end up in Australia? Because I love Canada. I love Canada. It's a lovely place. I love the snow.
Yeah. I mean, the snow is nice. It's not so nice 8 months of the year, but
all the Canadians I know are here for a reason. There is no snow.
Exactly. That's why I'm also here. It's nice and warm. There's no snow. Look, I love the snow and I think it's beautiful, but yeah, it gets old. I always look forward to it in November, December for Christmas. And then after January, everyone's kind of pretty much sick of it, but it goes up until April, May. So, no, it was love. And I followed my partner was, Australian. And so I moved to Australia in 2010. So 10 years ago, to be with him. But really I had been here before and I always wanted to come back. And so it was a very easy decision for me to move here. And yeah, I absolutely love it. It's home now.
It's amazing how many Canadians are here and they all hate the snow and they all think I'm crazy because I love it. It's so funny.
I know Australians are always chasing the snow and vice versa. We're like
everyone wants what they didn't have as a child.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And so how did you, so you're at the museum and you became like a STEM educator, did you? Is that what happened?
Yeah. So I became a STEM educator at the Science Museum in Canada. And then when I moved here, I went straight to, one of the biggest science museums in Australia and was like, I will work for you, please. And I was lucky enough to work there for 7 years. And yeah, my job was as a science communicator and science educator, just helping people understand and love and appreciate science and technology and engineering and maths as well, and putting on interesting events or education programs for schools or teacher resources, all those kinds of things. Those were all in my portfolio. And one of the things that was in my portfolio was co-creating and directing the Sydney Science Festival, and that was one of my favorite things that I got to do. Was start this festival that's now
I love that.
taken off.
It was such good fun, and it's good to see that Annie's back. Hello, Annie.
Hello. She's back.
Sorry about that. I've had to join on my phone. My laptop just went on the fritz. It happens.
Welcome back. Yeah, we were just chatting about how Isabelle transitioned into the STEM communications career.
Mm.
So yeah, and she came to Australia for love, as one.
I came to Australia for love too, but just more of the country and the sunshine, not necessarily of a person.
Well, me too, both.
Yeah, well, Canadians love the warm weather here. So, but how did you come to decide on doing a PhD? And tell us about your PhD.
Yes, well, So I was working at the museum on this, on a really fascinating project called the Mars Lab. And it was a project it was a partnership between, so at the time it was the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney with University of New South Wales and University of Sydney. And the three of us got together and we created this lab that was like a recreation of the Martian surface. It was literally 140 square meters of Mars surface, like red dust and rocks and everything. And then we had people build robots like rovers that young people at school within their classroom could remotely drive these rovers to conduct scientific experiments of the surface of Mars to see if Mars could have been habitable. So essentially, young people in their classrooms could do exactly what NASA scientists were doing here on Earth, driving rovers on Mars. So it was an awesome project. I got to do all the education resources and programs and work with the students and the teachers. And the lead of that, she was from UNSW. And she saw this curiosity in me. I always wanted to know if everything that I was doing was having an impact. Are people learning something? What are they learning? I want to know. And I was always asking to sneak in a little bit of research. And she said, well, I think you're a researcher, so you should be a researcher. Why don't you do a PhD with me? And, you'll get to do all that fun stuff. And I basically laughed and said, no, thanks. And she persevered for 2 years. And eventually I accepted and decided to do a PhD. And it was only after she sent me on this amazing trip to the Pilbara in Western Australia when I got to actually experience what research is really like. I went there with some world-leading geologists, and we were looking at the rocks in the Pilbara and using them as analogs for what people are looking for on Mars, and really getting into the research. And I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. And so I came back from the trip and I said, yes, I will do a PhD with you. And that was almost 5 years ago. But it was the best decision ever. And I'm so grateful to this woman. Her name is Carol Oliver. I'm so grateful that she convinced me to get into research, because I didn't know that's what I wanted to do until I did it.
That's marvelous.
That's super interesting. I guess in some ways, a lot of folks, and I'm probably definitely one of them, which is I wouldn't know why I should go into research as well. I don't know enough about the space. I don't know enough about the impact it has. I know it has impact, because without science and research, we don't move the whole kind of human race forward, I guess. So if you were trying to kind of encourage other women perhaps to go into research, what would you say? How would you convince them?
Well, I would just say do it. But to convince them, I guess it depends. Depends on the reasons why they might be hesitant in the first place. My hesitation wasn't necessarily that I was a woman that may not fit into the field. My hesitation was I can't be bothered to go back to uni for 5 years. But then it didn't feel like studying. It didn't feel like a chore, because it was so much fun. So, and I just didn't realize how much fun it could be. So that's where my hesitation was. But there is definitely, there are very real barriers and a lot of factors that contribute to women not wanting to go into that research field, especially in STEM. And it goes from stereotypes to discrimination to lack of support and everything in between. But there are a lot of programs and a lot of effort going into changing that. And real change is happening. And a lot of people are working on incredible solutions to dismantle those barriers and tackle those issues. And so I think that the future of women in STEM and in academia and research is bright. I have to believe it because that's my job at the Office of the Women in STEM Ambassador, but I do believe it.
To do it, because just by preponderance of numbers, we will shift things just by more of us being there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I believe it because I see all the effort and, the programs going and the real, people really want to change things systematically, like system-wide changes. And there's a lot of effort from government and business and industry and education going into changing things. So I truly think that things are going to shift. They're already shifting, and it's just going to get better. So women should be getting into it now, because it's just so much, so creative and interesting and exciting as a field that, it just, why not? Don't let that hesitation of being a woman in STEM and seeing those barriers as actual barriers, because we're breaking those down.
It's really interesting because we've got a new head of IT who's a bloke, who's a man, but he's modeling the kind of behavior. So he's now insisting every single IT committee has gender equity. And he's quite troubled when it doesn't. And he's insisting that there is an equal number of male and female resumes for every position and interviews. So he's really trying to change that. And IT has been a very traditionally blokey field. So, it's really interesting how just getting a leader into that area can start to shift it.
Absolutely. Anyone who's got like any kind of leadership role or power influence role if they get involved, it can really shift things. There's an initiative called Male Champions of Change. And that's exactly what that initiative does, is it pulls together leaders and influencers, men who, advocate for gender equity. And men have such a huge role to play in all of this. And it's disappointing when I see people pointing fingers. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about getting everyone on board to facilitate that change. And men are on board. Most men that I know are on board, and it's important to use that enthusiasm that they have to drive that change.
And we've talked a little bit about how you've been working with Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith. Tell us how that sort of transition happened, how you ended up joining that office, and how are you finding this sort of more, I guess, public-facing part of your role?
Yeah, look, it was a job came up, and I thought that looks awesome, and I got it. It's only been a year. I've only been in the job for a year, but it's honestly been absolutely incredible. I get to work on some pretty sweet projects, and one of my favorite projects is, and it's only one of my favorites because I've got a lot of favorites. We're doing this massive study, national study with big organizations across Australia who have grant schemes. And anyone in research and academia know how much we rely on grants. And, around the world, women have lower success rates than men when it comes to competitive grant schemes. And studies have shown that if you anonymize the reviews of those proposals, that kind of takes away this unconscious bias that's there. And that bias is exactly what I just said, unconscious, like we don't know that we have it. So, and everyone has it. Men and women have unconscious bias, and we can't really do anything about it because it's unconscious and we don't even know we're doing it. But removing the names of the applicants and their genders can remove that unconscious bias. So we're running a study with big research organizations around Australia and making their round applications blind or anonymous, and seeing what the effect of that is going to have on the success rate of women. And whatever we find, whether it's positive or negative, will really, have an influence on how we do things in Australia, especially in research and research funding.
I look forward to the results of that. I think we should just make everyone women.
That would be a really interesting twist on it.
maybe that's a variant, an A/B test to do. Well, in my team, everybody's a data middle woman, even the men. And the guys will say in a meeting, yeah, I'm just a data middle woman. So we have men in our team that say that, and it's really quite nice. But they acknowledge that we are a matriarchy in our team.
Yeah, that's really nice. So yeah, it's been really interesting to go through the change process, because to be able to anonymize the applications, these organizations have had to make significant changes to their processes and systems, and also convincing executive people, convincing committees. Everyone is open to change, but then when you have to make change, there's a little bit more resistance, or challenges come up, and it's a little bit more work than I thought it would be. But
change.
What's that?
Welcome to change.
Yes, exactly. It's like, well, if we're change is a verb, and if we're going to try to change things, we have to do something. And so it's one thing to say, oh yeah, I want to change and I want to, make things better, but then actually making that change requires a little bit of discomfort sometimes, or some new ideas or processes, finding solutions, ways around what we've always done. And I find that kind of stuff exciting and fun. Not everyone does, though, but yeah, it's been great, and everyone has been totally on board, and we have managed to create incredible change in these organizations just by implementing the anonymous process into their systems and processes.
That sounds like a really excellent idea. Just one thing. So what would your tip to people in other organizations, particularly grant-making organizations, that the one thing that they could change? One thing, just do one little thing.
One thing. One thing, especially in grants. Just try something new. If there's something that you feel isn't working, bring it up and try to find another way of doing it. Like I said, there are just so many barriers and factors that contribute to gender inequity, and other, cultural and all kinds of inequities. If you see something, then try to think of a way that would change things, and then try it and see what happens. See if it works. See, experiment. Be a bit of a scientist, and just do something and try to change it. And see what happens. And it doesn't have to be anything big. It can be small. But just try something.
That is a fabulous piece of advice. And thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Annie. Thank you very much, Isabelle. And please leave us a nice review or a like us, and we'll be back shortly.